Hello, Shauna here. We are wanting to just update you on where we're at in terms of groups. We're in the process of forming a group for autistic people who are in long-term relationships with non-autistic people. So sometimes that's called mixed neurotype relationships. It'll initially be a 6-week group, meeting fortnightly, probably starting in the autumn, early evening UK time. If that's of interest, please do get in touch with us. The next one, which may start around the same time, will be for autistic counsellors. Not supervision, not a space to talk about clinical issues, but a place for connection and relationship. Again, please let us know if you're interested in that. We will keep you posted. There is a sign-up sheet for our group's newsletter on our website on the group's page. If that would be easier, you'll get all of this information ahead of everybody else. Thank you so much. Lovely listeners.
This is a podcast which does not shy away from difficult and vulnerable topics. The content is of an adult nature and we do swear at times.
Welcome to the Autistic Licence podcast. I'm Shauna and I'm in Carrickfergus in Northern Ireland.
I'm Leo in London.
We invite you to listen in on our conversations as we experiment with unmasking in an autistic space. We talk about what it means to discover we're autistic as adults, especially with established careers as therapists. We want people to know that autistic therapists exist and to broaden the conversation about neurodiversity. You're so welcome to join us, whoever you are and wherever in the world you are. We hope you'll find something of interest and connection here. Good afternoon, lovely listeners. We are coming to you today from a place called Beccles.
If you want to be exact, we're just outside Beccles. We're in a place called Barsham.
Okay, Barsham in Suffolk in England. It's beautiful.
It is, and it's a glorious day. It's May the 1st is the day of recording, May Day. By the way, do you know why we say May Day when we're like in an emergency asking for help?
I do not.
What is help me in French?
Aide-moi.
Or, if you abbreviate it, m'aider.
M'aider. M'aider. Wait.
I only found that out recently. I was 8 years old when I found out where that came from.
Lovely.
And it is a lovely day, and it is the 1st of May. And Beccles is a nice word to say.
It is a nice word to say. I think that's why I decided that's where we were. Exactly.
And what I'm noticing, having, recording for the first time with Shauna for a long time, echolalia is in full force.
My echolalia is in full force. It is.
Thank you for repeating that I said your echolalia is in full force.
And yes, we have not actually been together for over 6 months.
Right.
And so this time I travelled and you travelled a little bit.
But you flew.
I flew and we managed to get very lucky with the weather. Oh, it's a bit too hot today though, to be fair.
Well, we have very finely tuned and narrow bandwidth for temperature comfort.
We do.
Which is a very autistic thing generally, but it so happens I think that ours is the same.
It's quite similar, isn't it? But yes, it's not too cold. And we're staying in a place that has very pretty gardens and things like that. So why are we here? You must be wondering.
Indoors.
No.
On a beautiful day.
Why are we near Beccles? Would you like to share anything?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm looking to move to somewhere around this part of the country. It's very beautiful. It's a tiny fraction of how much it costs to live in London. But it's easy to get to London where my family are. And so that's why we're here. And Shauna is you are the autistic home creator consultant.
Okay.
Partly.
I am sensory aware. I think that's the thing. I think that I bring that perspective, that I can pick up on all of those things, so that you know that you could miss if you're like not able to take it all in.
Exactly. And it's the you don't know what you don't know thing. So I knew that if I were to have come up here on my own for these few days, and if I'd have been looking at properties and areas, I wouldn't entirely trust that I hadn't missed something obvious. And I know that only another autistic person, but also one that I know I'm very attuned to, might, and you did, notice things. It was a very positive. Do we tell the story about what happened yesterday?
We can. Yeah, if you want, about that property.
It was just the whole surrounding narrative of it was something. But maybe I haven't said enough about...
So you're moving to a new part of the country to live alone.
That's right.
And you have been sort of wondering about what area might feel right for a while. And you identified that this area was one that you wanted to explore physically.
The counties are Suffolk and Norfolk, as in south and north. The area, the region of the country is kind of called East Anglia.
Yes.
That encompasses all of this. And it so happens that there's provenance for your family.
What does provenance mean?
Okay, I'm going to look it up because I'm not confident, but I think it means like origins.
There's history. Yeah, there's history. I've got lots of ancestors from Norfolk especially. Well, actually, no, back into the 1800s they were Suffolk as well. So that's like half of my genetics from my paternal side was all Suffolk and Norfolk.
Yes.
Right the way back. And they didn't move very far for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Here you are.
And here I am. So that's quite interesting. Although I haven't spent a lot of my life here. You know, it's not like I have had lots and lots of holidays or time spent here. And I'm not, as dedicated listeners will know, I am estranged from my dad, so I don't have any contact with him. And even before that, I didn't have contact with my extended family and no very close, significant relationships going back there. So it's in my DNA, and I have been tracking my family tree, and therefore I know more about it now than I ever did about my roots. And my DNA test came back and it showed all of that really, really accurate, like the percentages. So I really have a lot of that in my DNA. Not that this is in any way about me, but yes, that's a bit of a coincidence. That's the point.
That's you're here, and there is a link.
There's a link there.
Absolutely.
That's probably more in my history than in yours. It is not probably. It is more in my history. Although you've visited some areas around here as a child.
So we're not far from a beach and a village called Dunwich, and that was a regular place that we would come for holidays and go camping when I was young. And I still come up here sometimes because it's a day. It's 100 miles from North London.
111. Leo thought for 58 years that it was 100 because someone told him that in the 1970s.
That's correct, exactly. And now we have GPS and I can find out exactly.
111.
It was 111 miles. So it's a drive, but it's a day trip as well. Provenance is the place of origin or earliest known history of something.
Earliest known history, okay.
And place of origin as well. So it's
a very good word, okay. It's my provenance. Yeah. Well, it's half my provenance. Yes.
So for my move, I've got not that many criteria, but one is no more than about 2 hours drive from North London. Another one is availability of reliable fast broadband.
Yes.
And ideally rural or semi-rural. I don't want to be certainly don't want to be in a city, and I don't really want to be in a town, although there are some very beautiful little market towns in East Anglia. So we originally, when I was kind of looking online at potential rental properties, I found that this area that we're in was very promising, and it was probably, as I thought at the time, as close as I could get to London without it starting to get ridiculously expensive.
Yes.
So we did book this cottage where we're staying for a few days based on that. Since then, I've actually found I could be nearer to London and it'd still be quite affordable. So I've got a wider radius. But we did go and just drive by a place yesterday that I'd found online and is very near to where we are staying. And it looked amazing, so it was worth a kind of peek in before I rang the agent. So the night before last, I woke up having had quite a vivid dream. And I'm not going to say I don't normally dream. I think everybody dreams, but I very, very rarely remember dreams. I very rarely wake up with a memory of a dream. But this was quite specific. So I was in what is my room in this cottage while we're here. It's quite a big bedroom. And in the dream, I was kind of sitting up in bed and a hornet flew by me. And a hornet is like a wasp, but it's enormous. And I've never actually seen one face to face in real life, but I don't know why it appeared in my dream. And it flew by. And as it flew by and was flying away from me, this kind of little portal opened up in the back of it, and these millions of tiny little specks started flying out of it. And that was it. That was it. And I just woke up remembering seeing this hornet fly by, and then all these millions of little particles come out of the back of it.
You didn't tell me that morning. The next thing that happened was I had opened my Diet Pepsi and I said, you've forgotten this bit, haven't you? And I said, I want to go out and sit outside with this, but I'm not taking it out yet because then wasps will get in it, because I have all these anxieties about things like this happening, and I create all these what if scenarios. And you said, well, I don't think that's going to happen, Shauna. I haven't seen any round here. And I said, right, well, I'm going wherever I was going. Don't take that out until somebody's around to check that wasps don't get into it. And then we both went outside. You were probably drinking coffee or something. And we both went outside, and I wanted to keep an eye on my drink at all times.
When we say outside, we're not in the street or anything. There's a
lovely
garden and courtyard, and it's enormous. It's very, very beautiful. There's probably a picture on the pictures page. Yes.
So then we went outside and sat down, and a minute after we sat down, this gigantic, what I thought was a wasp, but turned out to be a hornet, arrived beside us. And I said, yeah, there's no wasps around here, right enough. And then Leo got really excited. He said, I think it's a hornet. What the fuck's a hornet?
It's a good 2.5 inches, 3 inches long.
And it was right beside us.
Yeah.
So we moved then to another place away from the hornet. And I was still going on about how wasn't I right? There clearly were wasps around. And another one actually was buzzing around. And then I think there was a little bit of there was a little segue into, those aren't wasps, those are hoverflies, Shauna, and things like that. But then we got back into, then you told me about the dream.
I did.
Then you told me about the dream. You told me all about the dream. And then...
well, you wanted to know about what were the interpretations of Hornet's dream.
Yes, because I thought, okay, there's symbolism here, and because I'm all into things like that, then that got my attention. So then we briefly looked it up. I meant to do a deep dive into that, but I haven't. I did not do any kind of a deep dive. But what you managed to find was that hornets can come whenever they're like clearing the way for something,
or to help in a change, or help in a change, move through something.
To move through something. So that was interesting. And then you probably said, can we go and, as part of our drive and where we're going, we will stop by the area where this house is, because I thought that whenever you'd showed me the house, it was worth going to see. And we were trying to work out the layout and where the station was in relation to it, and the road, and what else was nearby, and things like that. So then we drove there.
And it was all really positive as well.
Yeah, so take up the story from there.
It was unusual. I had lower expectations because, as I said, I expect that kind of marketing bump to be misleading at worst. But actually, it was a lot less kind of isolated than it had seemed on the map. The area was really, really lovely. And actually, there were a few more similar kind of conversions into really nice residential properties alongside. And the place itself, because it's got kind of like big French windows, so even though we weren't being shown around, we could look in and see quite a bit.
We could,
and I had all the photos that I'd seen on the listing online as well, so I knew what it looked like from the inside. And it just looked amazing. Absolutely amazing. The first thing I noticed, picture on the pictures page, the door knocker had an enormous, I suppose it was a bee, but it was very, very big.
They're part of the same family.
Absolutely. There was a big silver Hornet on the door knocker, and then another one on the house number as well, which was number 3, which has always been my lucky number. And so it all seemed to conspire. And then, don't know exactly from which plant or tree it was coming from, but there were millions of these little fluffy...
From that tree that I liked. So I'm looking for... Yes, because I've been wanting a tree for my front garden for so long, and I can't decide what to get. And so it's really like the type of tree that I really, really, really like. So then I was really taken by that tree. We need to fit a picture of that tree.
Yes, I took a picture.
Absolutely beautiful. But yes, we were sitting in the car and enthusing about the whole thing and getting excitable. And then the little pink leaves, the blossoms were flying from the tree in front of us. And then these were seed.
They
were like dandelions.
Yeah, we as kids we call them wishes. You catch when you make a wish.
Well, that's what we said. Exactly. What do they mean? And they looked like. Well, I said they might be fairies because that's how Tinkerbell arrives as well. But yes,
as a kid we called them wishes, and there were thousands and thousands of them
just for a time. And then you got excited because what did they look like?
Yes, well, as I say, yes, the little particles
that came out
of the Hornet in my dream. Absolutely. The air was absolutely filled with them.
Yeah. So it was very exciting. Yeah. And then, of course, a train went past. And then there was another train, wasn't there? And you were very excited because it was the main line and you'd be able to, spot trains all the time. Now, this would be a perfect story if you could actually get this house, but actually everybody wants this house and there's 9 people ahead of
I sent a message to the agent afterwards.
Yes.
And they didn't get back, and so I called them this morning, and no, it was already being processed for some tenants, and there were another 8 prospective tenants behind that person as well. So it seems very unlikely that will be mine. But it did make me feel very kind of attached, involved, immersed in the process. And it's made me feel very optimistic. The whole thing with the dream, the door knocker, the actual Hornet in the garden that morning, which is the first one I've ever seen. Normally that kind of stuff, I just love it. I love coincidence. I've always been very, very sensitive to coincidence. And I've never really had any desire to put meaning to it, just to enjoy the fact that these things just co-occur is intensely joyful to me. And it was what was lovely was to be with you, who will look for a connection and meaning and what it might symbolize. And I actually found myself really enjoying that as well. And it was such a colossal sequence of unlikely connected things at a moment when I'm creating a very profound change in my entire life. I had no resistance to it at all. And it was just very, not validating, it's something like validating when something is saying, yep, that's what you should be doing.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to know how to take those things, isn't it? It's like saying, oh, I dreamed this thing, so it's going to happen. Or I
don't
you don't mean it like that. It's not literal. What was that?
That was either an enormous bee
or a hornet,
or it was a hornet.
Something just bashed against the window.
It was definitely a bee or a hornet, because I got a good look at it. That's not too far away to see how big it was.
Right, well, that's weird. And talking about you. I think that for me, it's not enjoying those things in the same way. For you, for me, it is, okay, pay attention and wonder about the symbolism, like connecting into the collective unconscious, the associations that we have with things. And it's really not about necessarily like some kind of direct guidance of this is meant to be your house, and something around then that the hornet coming in there is about giving you maybe, well, you said validation, but maybe just like a clearing. It's like a
almost encouragement, maybe is a word. Support and encouragement.
Yeah,
that's what it more felt like.
Yeah, but even just a little bit of conscious awareness of what's happening sometimes just satisfies our human desire for some kind of numinous connection.
And as we say very often, we're pattern-seeking animals and we're sense-making animals. And this is where there's a crossover with therapy as well. When, say, we're trying to find reasons why we are as we are. That's what a lot of therapy is, and to understand it. And if those things are difficult, then understanding makes it easier to separate from them. And a story is what we kind of really need. We need a story as to why that is. But we're not a court of law. We're not police. We're not trying to find some kind of empirical evidence to truth necessarily. That's useful if it's available, but often it isn't, because some of those experiences are pre-verbal and we don't have access to them in our memory. But that actually shouldn't stop, and it doesn't in my work, and I'm sure many others, trying to find a narrative, because it's actually not so important that the narrative is factually true and a sequence of events that we can prove. What's more important psychologically is that we have a story that makes sense. And then we have a framework to understand the thing that's mystified us or that troubles us. So I always try to steer away, really, when empirical evidence and truth isn't available, but we can still make a story that makes sense. And here's an example, because we haven't talked about Molly yet. And God forbid we should go through an episode of that talking about lovely Molly, my dog. So she was adopted from a charity in Cairo. When she arrived with us a few years old, she had several teeth missing. We also know that she's really freaked out by the sound of a motorbike in particular. We made a story that she was hit by a motorbike, and that makes sense of all of those things. I have no way of knowing if that actually happened. But it ties together the things that I do know into a story that makes sense. And there's satisfaction in that. And in therapy, there's healing in that. And also it's very useful to be able to kind of learn to be comfortable with not knowing. Here's something that feels likely and plausible, and I can put some belief in it, but I can't know, and that's okay.
Yes. Now that brings up, though, lots of concerns that people have about certain therapeutic processes, about false memory. Yes, syndrome,
absolutely. And that's definitely not what I'm talking about.
Hit the news, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years ago. I remember it was really big. And people sometimes are concerned, well, what, I don't really have a memory of this. What if it didn't happen? What if I'm creating a memory of such and such? Which I guess if you were going to go on the basis of making some kind of accusation out of it or something, is obviously a different thing.
Yes, very different.
But I think that what you're saying is If a traumatic memory does not get processed, then it ends up stuck in a part of the brain where it's kind of frozen, waiting for some kind of consolidation. And you can do that consolidation narratively sometimes through something like EMDR or tapping, or a creative process that can move that memory on so that it gets stored in the memory bank, the hippocampus, with other memories that can be retrieved at will. That's where we want our memories to go, is that they hang out there, and then we can retrieve what we need to when we need to. The ones that haven't been properly processed hang out in the wrong area, and then they can be reactivated at inopportune times, and those are the ones that feel like flashbacks, or like something's happening to you now that happened way back when.
Yes.
And those memories need reconsolidated in some way, and sometimes part of the reconsolidation, which is how they move on to where they need to be in our psyche, can involve a story, which may or may not be factually
That's
accurate.
very important. It's very important. That's not what I'm talking about, of saying, well, this probably happened to you.
Yes.
And that is not it. It's purely an understanding that a narrative can help something very uncomfortable, but also unexplained. And so much of the anxiety that those seeming experiences, or at least feelings, cause is the not knowing why is that there. And so a narrative that's plausible and makes sense as a narrative, not as a this is part of your history and this thing happened to you. That's a very different, when you're talking about false memory, that was a very different and incredibly dangerous path to go down. Yes.
And at the same time, though, because of how time works, and because of the complex but actually really amazing capacity for plasticity and change within our brains, when these trauma memories are stuck and frozen, they can actually, obviously if the practitioner is trained and capable and competent, we can actually go in there and rewire that process of consolidation so that it is as if a new thing happened. And that's why we can go in and heal traumas that took place when we were tiny, because actually in many ways those synapses around those are able to be opened for a time and be worked with, and then to close over and continue their journey. And neuroscientists can write and come on the show and help to explain this a little bit more. But in that's obviously none of this is planned, so I haven't consulted any of my notes for 5 years on any of this stuff, so everything that I'm saying is off the top of my head. But yes, I think that there is a very real sense in which then the life that we lead going forward is based on the reconsolidation of that memory, as opposed to actually what did happen. And that's why, effectively, that's why therapy can have such a profound effect when we really do that very deep inner work.
I can bring the arc around again, actually, in a very real way. So, for example, I lived on my own for a good 15 years, and I was extremely miserable throughout that time. Yes. It was a really rotten 15 years. I was very, very unhappy. I was quite unwell with unhappiness, looking back. And so the prospect of living on my own again, my only experience of that as an adult, was horrible.
Yes.
So there is this automatic response of dread and very, very kind of low mood that will just sweep over me at the prospect of living on my own. The truth of it is that, everything about my life and everything about me is completely different.
Yes.
In the subsequent 15 years in between then and now. And of course, my experience of living alone now will be very, very, very different in every respect. I don't know exactly what it'll be like, and I might not like it, but what my brain will do, which is to thrive on the experience and the evidence that it's got, is to say, no, that will be awful.
Yeah.
And, I've processed all of that over the last year or so. But, the day yesterday of actually having a really very positive lived experience of something that, so far didn't come off, but it's like that final little bit of shifting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of stuff that's been hanging around the amygdala when it needs to go back into the filing cabinet, and I just, all that has
That's
lifted.
what the Hornet did then. It clears the space.
That's it. I think that's absolutely it. And I am gutted that property seems not to be available, but that's all it is. I'm disappointed about that property. It's got nothing at all
on a big scale. What you're saying is something neurologically might have shifted.
Yes.
Because it is true. There was no CBTing you out of those fears.
No.
And whenever you started to express, and it was like, it was quite clear from what in TA you would call an adult point of view. Why would you think that your experience now would be the same as it was 30 years ago?
Yes.
There's no evidence to suggest that. But that wasn't going to wash. There was no way you could just tell yourself that and it be okay.
No, not my child and not my parent either, actually. Yeah.
Yes, in TA works.
Yes.
What you're saying. But all the other parts of you and the traumatic parts of you that had all these memories and all of these beliefs that had got stuck and frozen, that were just being poked left, right and centre by the very prospect that you might consider making a change in your in where you live and whether you did that on your own or with somebody else. So yes, all of those memories came unstuck for a bit and needed to be reworked with, and some of them to be moved on into the past, into the memory bank,
and the
because
contextualizing of the present being very, yes. And so there's a recontextualizing of the separation of what is now has no relation to what was then.
Yes,
and that became rounded off. I lost something.
Well, the Hornet kind of just,
amazing, isn't it?
It is amazing. And that's much more, like, as we're talking now, we've made much more meaning around it, that it wasn't just about that property, but it kind of had to be staged and enacted around a real thing, because that's what life is like. But actually, it had more meaning in terms of actually, it is like enacting something or walking it through with the help of these kind of psychic forces.
And also to personalise it around you, if you had, as I think probably parts of me suspected, that it would be, you've made too much of this, can't you see that this is, for whatever reasons that I couldn't imagine, a bad idea. Yes, that particular property.
Why would I say that?
I don't know. That's what I mean. I don't know what I don't know. But there was part of me that expected you, or actually anybody else, because it was a very different kind of property. It's,
But it was very suitable for you.
Totally.
It ticked all your boxes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So your enthusiasm, because it was real.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't be able to, I wouldn't have any desire to make anything like that.
Exactly, so I know that. Or rather, to put it the other way, if you had been in some way concerned about that property and wanted to dial me down, then I wouldn't have got to the end of that process of clearing the way.
That's right, yeah.
And that's a shitty thing to admit to, really, because that sounds like I needed your approval in order to, but it's not that as such. It's just that the enthusiasm that got reflected back at me allowed me to take it all seriously and until it was out of my control. And I'm fine with that.
Out of your control. Yeah, and it wasn't you know, it wasn't a completely unbalanced assessment either. Like we did, you know, there was pylons close by.
Yes.
We talked about that, and we talked about what's the catch, and you know,
right. It wasn't
blind
blind enthusiasm and
anything like
definitely.
that.
Very important too.
And why would you not want another pair of eyes and ears and nose? Because it was like,
that was
I can actually smell something over here by the railway. So what is that? And I'm picky.
Yeah, but in similar ways to me. That's the thing. In things...
Well...
Maybe
not in terms of
maybe a great deal more extreme in
well, no. Can I just say I wasn't going to? I think you're saying about the
I wasn't thinking of anything.
The wasps and ants and things. No, I was thinking about your standards of opening crackers and how my standards are not high enough for you.
Your echolalia kicked in big time then. I bet you can still remember
What was it? Something like, Christ almighty, what kind of abomination do we have here? Because I dared to open the crackers without using the little red pilly thing around the top.
So it didn't. Yeah. So the top of the plastic wrapping did not come off neatly and symmetrically. It was some awful mess of an abomination.
An abomination. Yes, la-di-da, that is what you're like sometimes when you just break into that posh nonsense.
And yes, the accent is getting more and more accurate when you echolalia at me.
Well, but I mean, some of it is taking the piss, but a lot of it is just because my echolalia is unmasked, and that's been an unconscious process, but is able to be made more conscious with you because I think it just naturally comes out more with you, and maybe I still unconsciously mask it in some other places, not at home, but in lots of other places. But I know it's there because I know that now that I'm more tuned into it, I hear it in my head more often. And I don't know when this episode will come out, but the last guest episode we had, which was with Megan Ray,
that's right.
And they were talking about their son and his echolalia, and I know that in the middle of that I was like, that's me, that your son's head is what's in my head. And their son had actually shared that with them, and the gift was that they shared that in our guest conversation, and I was like, yeah, that's me. That's what I'm like. And that was the first time I had actually said that. Yes. But yes, my echolalia is white, which is lovely. I'm just like that, and I've obviously always been like that. But
I enjoy it. I really enjoy it. It's as satisfying, I think, to hear as it might be to do.
Yeah. Well, you don't like it because it comes out in your accent.
I know, I do like it when it comes out in I think it's hilarious. I'm trying to allow myself to be reciprocal in that, but it seems there's probably an imperialist thing, isn't there? There's a cultural imperialism thing.
What do you mean?
Well, it's like... There's a comedian, he died a few years ago, Sean Locke, who did quite a good little routine on this, about how the dominant culture, if I were to do a 1970s Benny Hill comedy, inverted commas, Chinese accent when I spoke, that would be horribly offensive.
Yes.
Right. But it wouldn't occur to us probably as historically the dominant culture there comparatively if it were the other way around. However, I mean, his take on that was that the speed at which China is evolving and developing, and they're going to overtake us, quite soon it will be very offensive for a Chinese person to do an English accent. They'll say, all right, mate, and their friends go, oh, you shouldn't, no, don't say it like that, it's not okay. And there's something of that between us that I think I'm aware of then. Just
because I have
speaking.
a chip on my shoulder about that and say you think you're better than me because you're London.
I'm English, I'm posh, these are all the things that you will mention. And that's fine. And I'm not offended when you do my accent. But part of me believes it would be uncomfortable and wrong to do yours. And I think that is this kind of...
Is it because of my attitude to it, or would you feel that way with everybody?
Well, there is your personal attitude to it, but I just generally don't think that I would do that.
Because people
would do it to you because I know you so well, and it's almost encouraged, and I'm not very good at it anyway, so I don't even have any particular swagger or confidence about my ability. But it's okay because you do it to me all the time. But I think the resistance probably is that kind of imperialist, dominant, discomfort of being, a colonial power. And so to mock you is different. It's from a power dynamic point of view, culturally.
That is true. And it wouldn't, unless I was in a particularly touchy, trying to put that on you mode, then I wouldn't take it like that. But I suppose it is that historical sense of that the Queen's English is the way that English people speak, and that the dialects are not proper proper English. So there is that. Yeah. But your awareness of that, and you are super aware of all of that stuff, and a lot of people wouldn't be. Isn't that right?
Yeah, it's not just funny to me to speak in a funny accent, i.e. one that's different from mine. That's not funny to me. Funny is the context that somebody might do that, or they might do it to mock that kind of Benny Hill racist attitude, and then that can be funny. And that's, I'm absolutely not. It's the context. It's the context around it. Yes, aren't foreigners funny is not amusing to me in its own right. There has to be some kind of context around that's funny in its own right. But yes, I think that's it. Also, now this is a whole other thing, but it's something I was thinking about a week or two ago, and I think I might even have made a note about it. But we talked a little while ago about our different ways of making our difference okay, which was yours was to be invisible, and mine was to be indispensable. Yeah. So very visible. Yeah. In a particular way. And I thought more about that, and I realised that there's a few strands to that. And this touches, I thought of it again because of what we were just talking about. Because you were in a historically, but even in your own lifetime, when people will point these things out in the kind of humour that we were just talking about. So culturally, you are from, or your Irish part of you is from a colonised culture. Yes. And I am from the colonising culture, kind of, but I'll come to that in a minute. Yeah. And so the defence of not being persecuted there is to be invisible, to keep your head down. Yes. Because you're being dominated. So that fits with your style of self-protection in your difference. And you've talked about this a lot. So you do well enough that you're not failing, and that draws attention, but you don't want to shine too brightly because that also will bring attention. That, autistically you're uncomfortable with anyway. But again, there's this cultural thing. So cause no ripples. Don't do anything would be the injunction there, and that's very familiar. Mine, and this is where this is not to do with me, but I don't feel like I'm from a dominant culturally, historically. That's where I feel Eastern European and Jewish. Yes. So you're not, and so I'm from a diaspora. That's right. Rather than being oppressed at home, if you like, which is a very different experience. Of course, this is inherited. It's not something I've gone through directly myself, but you become indispensable. So when your difference is that you are out of place and you're somewhere that isn't your home, in however that you might be made to feel that, then you don't keep your head down because there might be people actually out looking for you to get rid of you. So you become a doctor, you become whatever. And so my way of dealing with the fact that I'm different, and whether that difference is neurotype or I'm very short for a human male or whatever, is to be funny. That's one kind of being, that's what I was at school. Because that's a kind of indispensable. People want you around because of good entertainment value, but of course in the process you allow yourself to be oppressed, to be the butt of the jokes, etc. All the way up to what I do for a living now as well. There's the cultural aspect, the historically cultural aspect about dominant cultures. There's there were 3. I might actually have to look up my note because I remember 3 threads to this. Another one is just gendered as well. We are stereotypically conforming to a gendered way of being seen and not heard, or not seen, of course, but, quiet, subdued woman and a loud. I mean, these I'm exaggerating all these to make a point, of course. But we conform to a gender stereotype a gender conditioning, actually. Within the culture that we live in as well. I think I might have to look this up because there was a third one as well.
But, the thing is that when we have talked about these things, and often this is what happens, isn't it, between two people and they're talking and they embody the extremes and the polarities of things. And actually, as time goes on, you realise then you've got aspects of both and you're not that different. So we have a bit of a stereotype going on that you're such and such and I'm such and such. But whenever we go a little bit deeper, we see that there's actually lots of, it's hard for you sometimes to be seen and put your head above the parapet. That is a wee phrase that you use sometimes, and it doesn't, then suddenly you don't want to be indispensable. You actually don't want to be seen. And, while I might say I hide, I just throw myself on the line sometimes for the hell of it by saying, I don't like what that person wrote there, so I'm just going to write something back, and then, invite being seen on a Facebook thread in a way that you won't. So it's like role reversal.
Yes, that's true.
And I actually recently was working with a part of me that I identified, which is, it's absolutely there, and it's not only a new part, where my indispensability comes out with information giving and information sharing. And, so even though I don't want to be seen on one level, there's this other part that makes myself seen and that goes, shoot me down if you want, or think I'm, I think there's something about, it comes with a certain amount of shame or embarrassment, but doing it anyway. And I mean, I guess that comes out in the podcast as well, but that sees that that's my value in the world, and that sometimes will overdo that because underneath it, this part fears that what else do I have to give? So, but then of course that can sometimes get exploited. But then the danger in the past from not being seen would be that sometimes then I didn't come real for people, and then I think that led into some scapegoating or not having the voice to speak up, or not being seen to have a strong enough voice. Or sometimes just being able to be projected onto from everything because you weren't speaking out about who I actually was. So we get, and then obviously it's the extreme versions, so they're the least healthy versions. Like, we've all got to be able to move through this. But it's been interesting to me recently to notice the ways in which the things that I think are you and not me, and that we are so different, like they come out in both of us at different times.
I think the other thread it was actually only those two threads that I brought up that I'd noted actually, but the other one just was actually more along the ADHD lines that I have so far, and I think this is changing, but I think I have a more prominent ADHD part of me than you do. Well, mine is more visible than yours. And that is also reflective in those styles of, you know, there is how we've talked about this before, how many times, you know, have I heard autistic people talk about the discomfort of being perceived. It's not even just seen or noticed, but perceived. It's very specific. And obviously there is activation and stimulation in being either the centre of attention or just being noticed in that way that ADHD can thrive on or encourage. So there are also those aspects. But of course, you know, from my own ADHD perspective, those things change in priority all the time and dominance all the time. And also back to the gender thing, and I've said this so many times, but I know I just don't conform to the male autistic stereotype that most of the original definitions of autism were based on. They are not me, and I've said it clumsily, but there's some truth to it, that I have much more female experience of being my autistic self than what's understood to be the male one. And of course, you know, the more we talk about it, the less those distinctions and definitions are relevant in our experience.
Yeah. I think that maybe this is what you were saying there, but I think between us, experientially, that kind of stuff, we just are who we are, which is why, so like, do I see you as male, or does that not mean anything? And then things that are so normal to us, then we're really surprised. So like that example of you got a message on our way here from the woman who's renting this place out to say, I'm assuming you're a couple, you only need one room.
That was amazing.
And we were like, what the fuck? Why would you think that? And it took time to realise that's probably what most people would think. It's wrong. Well, like, why would it be? Because if two women were travelling, would you automatically assume that they're a couple? And even if people are a couple, they still might choose to sleep in separate bedrooms. Yes. But it's so just not how we see each other or how we see people that we would make an assumption like that. And then to be grouped together in that kind of way made that it was like, oh my God, like, would most people just think, oh, that's a natural assumption, we can correct them or we can not. Yes. But it felt like, it was being perceived, isn't it?
Yes.
And just like, well, we're just two people, you don't know anything about us, so why would you assume that?
And as you said, if you were actually interested in evidence, then it's available to this person that you live in Northern Ireland and I live in England, and that's a question that raises a question. It was very interesting from a number of perspectives, and I have to assume things here. I assume that person wouldn't have assumed we were a couple if we were same sex or visibly same sex. I don't think they would. But then, is that better or worse? It's just as bad.
You see, you kept saying better or worse, and I was like, it doesn't matter about any of that.
No, you shouldn't do any of it. That's what I mean. But the fact that it made a difference, that we are a male-female pair of people.
Apparently.
Renting. Exactly. It's all apparently she would have had access to our profile photos and our names, and on that basis, she probably, clearly did assume, and correctly assumed, to be fair, our genders. But yes, you're right.
Well, not really, because we're saying, actually, how do we know? I mean, I am fairly clear that I'm cisgender, that I am a woman. Yours is still, you're still working with that.
It's conceptual, exactly. And I oscillate away, back and away from I don't care.
Yes.
It's irrelevant. But it's not irrelevant. It's very, the current, in the world that we live in at the moment, it's very relevant. And so I do then feel almost a social duty to talk about it and maybe to have a position But then I'm resistant to that because that's conforming to something too. Yeah. But I also do, as I say, I'm torn because I feel the need to care because it's important at the moment that we don't just blindly conform and accept, because there is so much unhappiness and persecution and distress and trauma for the many people who are genuinely uncomfortable. Yes. I'm putting that mildly, with how they're perceived in terms of any aspect of their identity. But at the moment, we're thinking a lot about gender and sexuality. I don't know. I read something a day or two ago, and this is probably more American focused because it's, about all the many unbelievable things that Trump is doing. But actually, somebody was speaking, I hope rationally. I know that a lot of these things are getting resisted down the line. Trump will make or one of his cohort will make some...
Well, it's RFK, isn't it?
Yes, specifically right now there's that, and that's what concerns us, but certainly our American cousins. Neurokin is that, yes, they'll say these things, they'll put them all together. Somebody was saying they really don't actually have it together enough organisationally, infrastructurally, to actually see a lot of these things through. Plus, and I hope this is more than wishful thinking, obviously. I recognise that it might be. But also, courts are resisting an awful lot of the stuff that's happening, and there is pushback. So terrible things will happen, I've no doubt. But there is an assumption, I think, that when somebody says or proposes something horrific, that it is because they are in a position of absolute power and privilege that it's going to happen. And actually, at least so far, that's not necessarily true. And that's something to, again, it's about that immediacy. But of course, we react to something terrifying and horrific in real time, but the process is very, very long. The processing is very, very long and involves lots of people. And while there are some remnants of democracy still floating about, then we have to not just trust that will be part of the process, but be involved in it as well. And I think that is what he was also saying. This is the time, we're not this tiny little group of silent people. A lot of us are silent for exactly the reasons we've just been talking about. The discomfort of being perceived and the terror of exposing ourselves to harm.
And bad things that have happened.
And bad things, of course.
We have.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So it's, yes, again, it's that need to helicopter up and take a wider contextual view of what's happening and what's being said. Not just to blindly comfort ourselves, but to actually just realise that nothing is inevitable.
Yeah, but if you're in a heightened nervous state...
Yeah, that's right.
Then you're storying. Let's go back and going back to storying and narrative. Like Deb Dana says, story follows state. What she's basically saying is, we will tell a different story based on what nervous system state we're in. So the story I'll tell about myself and my situation from a ventral place will sound very different than if I'm speaking from a dorsal place or a sympathetically activated state. But it can be the same, it's the same life and the same, but how it's told and the aspects of it that feel real and significant and important. And if we speak out of that state, it's going to sound very different, and it's actually not really going to change anything.
Exactly. And that, I think, is why I just want to say these things, and the others I would like to see saying these things out loud. It's not just about, hey, guys, have some perspective. It actually is about, what's the difference between those nervous system states that you were saying, without any narrative changing, without anything in the real world changing, those experiences changing. What is the mechanism? It's time. And
co-regulation.
There's nothing wrong with having an immediate reaction, an immediate feeling and doing things, but to try to hold the knowledge, the experience that, it just sounds so trite and pat. It'll be different in the morning, but it will be different at another time. And I just think it's so important to try to hold that longer term, wider perspective as a mechanism for self-regulation in the short term and action and actual difference in the longer term. I think.
Well, the only way it can be different in the morning, literally, is if your nervous system is different in the morning, if you have actually had some sleep,
yes.
and then there's been some chance for some pathways inside to change shape and move along, and deactivation to go down, and, you know, to go into that rest and recover state. So that's the only way. It's not just naturally better in the morning.
No, absolutely.
But that's also to do with, like, what co-regulation can do. So I think that that also changes things, and that as a community, that's where, like you said, we're not on our own, and there is a lot of people, there is neurokin that can stand together if they can find each other and find a ventral energy together, going into sympathetic energy when they need to get shit done, yes, but coming back to the ventral co-regulation, which is also much more possible for us to do at a distance than if we were actually in it.
A thought I've had just on the whole issue around RFK's dreadful work is that, just to bear in mind, everybody try and remember this, that if that kind of continues as it is, even just for a little while, there is already a massive plummet, obviously, in the amount of people going to be assessed and diagnosed with autism because of the fear of what that might mean for them. So you can imagine that in a year's time, he may well be able to say, look, it worked. There are less autistic people. There's a massive decline in autism since I did my brilliant work on getting rid of autism. Well, no. For exactly the same reason that there's been an explosion.
There has been.
It's not the numbers that are going to change.
It's the visibility.
It's the visibility.
Or the medicalisation and allowing ourselves to be tracked in that way.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe the other side of it is that it'll, you know, self-identification, which is where it always needed to go anyway.
Yeah.
We never should be needing to get diagnosed, really, unless it's about, I mean, we do it for access to services often, but if that's not going to get people anywhere, then we need each other more than we need diagnosed.
This isn't about cup half empty or half full, or, as an engineer would say, a cup is twice as big as it needs to be. That's just to hold perspective. It isn't blind faith, it's not blind hope. That these things are not inevitable. So right now, Molly is fine. Molly is with my mum and dad and their dog Lolly, and they are very good friends. And I've seen some photos that Mum has sent of Molly eating, which is good.
Molly eating Lolly's food.
Lolly's food, absolutely. But she can go off her food when myself or Rachel are away. That happens sometimes, but the fact that that didn't happen is great. And one of her fast asleep, curled up on a cushion on the sofa watching telly. These tell me that she's okay. I'm away for 3 nights altogether. It's not a big deal. There is obviously a question about where she lives when Rachel and I are living apart.
Yeah.
We don't have children. There's not childcare, custody and all of that to think about. But there's a dog.
There's Molly care.
There's a dog. And as I'll be renting, that's actually quite a big block because almost everywhere will say no pets. So we will see. As far as I'm concerned, and this isn't me just being how amazingly selfless Leo is, but if Molly is okay, that's okay. That matters way more to me than whether she's with me or anyone else. I want her to be okay. And if she's not with me, there will absolutely 100% come a time when there is another dog around, or dogs. That's a very important part of my lifestyle now, is that I own a dog.
Yes. Yes. And again, there are so many ways in which this can be worked out that, you know, when we don't have those templates of what the right thing is or what it has to be like, Because I guess that makes me think, because Ricky is staying in my house at the minute with Lana, and that's an unconventional relationship that lots of people can't get their heads around, where we're separated. And at times like this, the best solution is that he moves into the house that we used to live in together and stays there with Lana and the cats.
The cats.
Yeah. And yeah, because yesterday I said, is Molly okay? Have you heard? And you had heard that she had like eaten half of her dinner, which was a good thing.
Yes.
And I said, well, my equivalent is, I asked if either of those two had fed the cats, and Ricky replied, what cats? And then didn't give me any information for like hours. And I think the next thing he said was, I did feed Lana too.
Yes. And interesting, I think what he's pointing out there, which is actually a bloody good point, is you didn't ask if you fed Lana. only the cats.
Well, because I know that the two of them are prone to just not put food out for the cats. Because it's just something that I make sure is covered.
Yes. And it was.
But yes, it was covered. Or else he thought, well, what she doesn't know won't hurt her.
Yes. Because they're not dead.
I have seen them on video call. So is there anything else that we would like to share today? It looks like it's maybe not as bright anymore, so we might venture outside. Might not be too hot for our delicate autistic sensitivities.
Well, I'm definitely going to acknowledge how lovely it is sharing space with you again in the real world.
Thank you. It has been a long time. And it's a new season, isn't it? In lots of different ways.
Many ways.
Lots of different ways. So, thank you for being with us, lovely listeners.
We'll speak to you again very soon.
We hope so. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to the Autistic License podcast. You can connect with us via Instagram, Facebook at autisticlicense.com, or by email at autisticlicense@gmail.com. And we spell license the British way, LICENCE. We also have a thriving Facebook community. Search for Autistic License Shauna and Leo, or click on the link in the show notes.